What science mystery has been explained that few people know about? Story 1. Spontaneous human combustion. Somebody who lives alone drinking alcohol has a stroke or heart attack, falls down and a cigarette ignites a fire, and their clothing and body fat cause a wick effect similar to a candle. There is a fire that is long burning and localized. The lower legs are often unburned as they don't contain much fat. Experiments with pig carcasses have verified it. This is one explanation for some specific cases. I'm sure there are other cases which, while they were reported as SHC, don't follow your narrative here, but are still well explained by some normal natural sequence of events. Story 2. Pretty much all creepy house phenomena are caused by temperature changes. During the warmth of the day, the wood beams expand. In the evening, they cool down and begin to contract. This causes creaks and groaning that you can actually hear. It sometimes even sounds like someone is moving somewhere else in the house. Interestingly, these contractions actually produce a lot more infrasound than audible sound. Though humans can't audibly hear this type of sound, we can faintly detect it, and it tends to creep us the hell out. The most important piece of the puzzle is this: agent detection. As an evolutionary rule of thumb, it is far better to detect a threat and be wrong about it than it is to fail to detect an actual threat. Your brain will actually presume that there really is something in the vicinity and that it is dangerous. In reality, it's just the wood beams in your house contracting. Anyway, you're scared crapless, and something important happens. Your hair stands on end. This happens for two reasons. One, back when your ancestors had fur, it made them look like a larger and more difficult prey item. Secondly, it allowed them to be more sensitive to wind direction. Being sensitive to wind direction is important because, as potential prey, you always want to be downwind of your predator, real or imagined. This hypersensitivity also causes you to detect temperature variances better and is responsible for you suddenly feeling cold when the ghost is nearby. Story 3. The Antikythera mechanism. Long story short, an ancient Greek box full of gears, found in a shipwreck that many authors, cracked, claimed was too crazy complicated for them to make, and that no one knows what it does. We know exactly what it does. Modern imaging lets us look inside it and count the teeth on the gears, and they would allow the user to calculate planetary positions and predict eclipses. It was likely used for determining the scheduling of the Olympic Games. Story 4. The Lost Civilization Atlantis. It's not lost. It never existed in the first place. Atlantis was first mentioned in Plato's Timaeus as a heuristic device, a fictional place to help thinkers examine ideas of government and power. It was not taken seriously until modern times. I recall seeing a documentary that Atlantis was actually Akrotiri on the then volcanic island Santorini and was advanced for its time, with stuff like an advanced drainage system. Came to this thread to say exactly this. The documentary went into detail using the original Greek sources to find evidence. Most striking for me was that in the source claimed Atlantans used red beige and black clay from their island, which is still used today. Plus, numerous red beige and black mosaics potteries have been found. They also found amazing images of the island as a bustling port with sailboats that were more advanced than contemporaneous civilizations. OP says the source was a fiction, and this is partly true, but many historiographers would tell you that fictional stories like this were often rooted in facts that had been passed down and used to teach a lesson, in a way like how we use history today to learn from our mistakes. I remember them interviewing archaeologists who just kind of shrugged and said it was general knowledge among anyone who was interested in this field. Story 5. Crystal Skulls. In 2008, a team of British and American researchers, using electron microscopy and X-ray crystallography, examined skulls from the British Museum and Smithsonian. A detailed analysis of the skull's surface revealed minute rotary scratch marks around the eye sockets, teeth, and cranium. This was clear evidence that the skull was cut and polished with a wheeled instrument, and the Aztecs never used the wheel. The researchers concluded that the skulls were cut from a piece of Brazilian rock crystal in Europe. They were then probably sold to collectors as a relic from the ancient Aztec civilization. Story 6. Do women blush in the dark? Writing in the late 18th century, the German scholar Georg Christoph Lichtenberg observed, "The question whether young women blush in the dark is a very difficult one. At least, one that cannot be settled by light. Even Charles Darwin was unable to solve the mystery, although he did suggest an answer in the expression of the emotions in man and animals. Several ladies who are great blushers are unanimous in regard to solitude, and some of them believe that they have blushed in the dark. I have no doubt that this latter statement is correct. The answer? Denise Wachter and Volter Sontjens used a Testo 875 thermogenic camera in a pitch-dark room to film the face of a 31-year-old woman who was specially selected for her talent to blush easily. After allowing her to acclimatize to the temperature of the room, they made one measurement before asking her to describe an embarrassing story that had happened to her. Reporting their findings in the Annals of Improbable Research, they wrote, "By showing that people can blush in the dark, we have finally solved this age-old problem." Story 7, not exactly confirmed, but it had been a question as to why the two lookers of the Titanic did not see the iceberg much sooner, given the reported clear night. Turns out it was most likely due to super refraction. They also lost their binoculars, so they could not see nearly as far out as they should have been able to. Like a number of compelling disasters, the story of the Titanic is one of a majestic clustercrap of errors and bad luck, with no one thing being pinnable as the singular cause. Smith was going too fast for conditions, and had reason to know it, bespeaking his arrogance. He was also apparently among the very few people in a position to know better who believed that the ship was literally unsinkable, perhaps also bespeaking fatal ignorance. On the whole, he was noble and distinguished, but possibly not as bright as someone in his role should have been. The iron was more brittle than it should have been, due to foundry deficiencies of the time. The ambitiously large design introduced stress factors that had not been sufficiently tested and accounted for. In short, the ship was more breakable than their numbers on paper suggested it was. The watertight bulkheads did not go up all the way, ensuring that any sufficiently large breach would end with her foundering. The combined capacity of the lifeboats was woefully short of the capacity of the ship, because of overly optimistic notions about how ship rescues would go, and had in the past led them to be unduly reckless about it. And more too, but you get the idea. The sweeping generality that the disaster was mainly a product of hubris is unfortunately validated by what we know about it. A bit more caution and humility might have saved many lives. Story 8. Since there are a lot of history mysteries in this thread, I'll change it up with a science mystery. A lot of people wondered how animals like tigers get their stripes, and people today still don't believe it's been solved. It has been proven, though, and the answer is that tigers get their stripes from two morphogens. A morphogen is a chemical agent, and a tiger and other animals have a morphogen that activates with another morphogen to cause their stripes. This theory was actually suggested 62 years ago and was only recently proven. Story 9. What happened to little Albert, the subject of Watson's conditioning experiment? I heard the findings at a conference a few years ago. If I remember correctly, they found out he died as a child. Before then, we didn't know if there might be an old man in a nursing home somewhere who was still afraid of white mice. For those unfamiliar with the experiment, a baby, little Albert, was conditioned to fear white rats, and the fear was generalized to other things white and fluffy, cotton balls, white rabbits, etc. The caretaker of the child left with little Albert before Watson was able to remove the conditioned fear response. Story 10, late to the party, but this one pisses me off. We know exactly what Nixon was looking for in the Watergate Hotel. It was evidence that he and Kissinger committed treason in '68 by convincing the Vietnamese to prolong the war. You see, back in October in '68, Johnson said there would be a major announcement in a couple days. He was going to announce a brokered ceasefire, or truce. I'm not sure exactly what was brokered, just that it would have ended the war. It would have been a genuine October surprise, and almost certainly won the Democrats the White House. Nixon had Kissinger call the Vietnamese and convince them to hold out for a Nixon presidency where they could get more favorable terms. They did, and the war didn't end for another 5 years. 15,000 American deaths, plus a bajillion Vietnamese and Cambodians. Nixon was worried that Johnson had evidence of this, and he did. The FBI recorded the phone call. The only reason Johnson didn't release it to the American people is because it was an illegal warrantless wiretap. When Nixon burglarized the Watergate Hotel, He was looking for evidence that he scuttled the 68 peace talks. That recording exists today in the Johnson Library. And Kissinger, the treasonous piece of crap, continues to give lectures in Germany, or whatever the hell he does. Story 11, not really a mystery, but every year I meet someone who doesn't believe man has landed on the moon. Last year, as a senior in high school, my US government teacher told us he thinks we never landed on the moon. His supporting evidence was insanely stupid, but a lot of the kids in my class believed him. I wish I could remember where I heard this, but the bulk of it was, interestingly enough, of all the conspiracy theorists who believe we didn't land on the moon, the Russians haven't disputed it. Basically, the one group who actually has a reason to not believe this still know that we've actually landed on the moon. That speaks volumes to me. Story 12. Phobias and anxiety have been attributed for many years to traumatic events or environmental factors in the life of the sufferer. It turns out that most inexplicable phobias in young children are very probably inherited genetically and can be passed through DNA for multiple generations. So, while the cause is a traumatic event or other environmental factor, it very well may have been something that happened to your great-great-great-great-great-grandfather, and not necessarily to you. Story 13, that people in the Middle Ages were dumb. Back then, they were aware that the Earth was round, they even knew the approximate circumference of the planet, and the lifespan was longer than many people today think if you made it through childhood. Also, they had bathing houses like the Romans, so they weren't unhygienic. Starvation wasn't a daily problem, and witch persecution didn't exterminate half the population, although the plague did, but that's another story. Sort of. Medieval Europe was not full of idiots, but compared to China, India, or the Middle East, it was pretty second-rate. See, China and India kept a lot of their ancient knowledge, and the Middle East did fantastic stuff with ancient Greek and Roman texts as a basis, while Europe suffered severely, because A, they couldn't get their hands on many classical works, and B, even if they could, people kept getting attacked by marauding bands of Goths, /Saracens, /Vikings, etc. So learning and knowledge was of secondary interest. It's interesting to note that the one time in the Middle Ages that most of Europe was in control of one person, Charlemagne, learning flourished, but things kind of collapsed right back again once he died, and his sons couldn't keep it all together. Furthermore, there was a lot of crop failure, hence the starvation myth, and the bathhouses were used for centuries, but slowly fell out of favor as they were believed to be sinful. Kinda true. And full of germs with all that shared water, definitely true. Story 14, The Secret, or whatever's hard enough for what you want and the universe will provide nonsense. It's trending right now. It comes from some misunderstanding about the observer effect in quantum mechanics. So if you believe something hard enough, it will manifest in reality or some nonsense like that. Of course, no one is asking what the universe did for all that time without someone to observe it into existence. The secret is just new, agey bullcrap designed to make wallets lighter. Hey, there's some truth to the idea. If you're thinking carefully about something you hope to happen, you're more likely to seek out, notice, or take opportunities to get the thing. The mechanism Byrne, 2006, proposes is clearly false, but the concept isn't totally bullcrap. Story 15, The Abidos Helicopter. I can't even tell you how mad that makes me. It's the purest form of ignorance and ahistoricity. Do these paranormal jackasses think that hieroglyphs have anything mysterious about them? What, like they haven't been deciphered for 200 years? The fact that that's the only fucking instance ever of that supposed helicopter hieroglyph doesn't tell them something. There were about 800 signs in use in this period of Egyptian history, believe me. They kept repeating themselves. It's a perfectly legible language. And where exactly is even one artifact of this supposed ancient helicopter building civilization? Okay, time to stop. Story 16, first of all, thank you for putting a serious tag, as this thread would have gone full meta. As for a mystery, the Bermuda Triangle is a good one. It's really just methane gas and weather patterns that cause the numerous disappearances. Also, it happens in many parts of the world, not just the Bermuda Triangle. And even triangle is inconsistent, as the boundary lines vary with every retelling of this tale, and some disappearances that occur outside of the boundary are still attributed to the triangle. But people like triangles and pyramids and stars which are made of triangles in their mysteries, and it sounds better than Bermuda Zone. Story 17. Ouija boards are not ancient, mystical, demonic, or magical. They didn't exist in any form before 1891. They were patented by a businessman to make a quick buck during the Victorian spiritualism fad of the period when seance parties were popular. All references to it being anything supernatural are from books, stories, and movies that came out over the years. Of course, Christians stupidly took it all at face value and warned about it being used to summon demons and practice witchcraft to this day, especially to children, which is why the myth about it goes on so long. I had to hear about it during my time in a religious school, and also had to hear about how demonic metal music and Dungeons and Dragons were. Story 18, you can fly a helicopter to the top of Mount Everest. It's been done, and people keep doing it. You don't have to climb that crap anymore and risk dying, just take a helicopter ride. As far as I remember, one very specialized pilot did it once or twice in perfect conditions after lots of training, etc. I don't think that a passenger could has ever tagged along for a helicopter ride and dismounted to stand on the summit. Even so, that would probably be more dangerous than climbing Everest outright. Helicopter rescues are even still considered impossible above 8,000 meters. Anyways, no one in the climbing community would respect that crap for a minute. Story 19. It is entirely possible that Jack the Ripper was a British painter named Walter Sickert. This one could be controversial now, with new claims that a DNA breakthrough solving this case. But long before this possible evidence emerged, there was a theory that Sickert was the killer. See, his paintings tended to be rather dark and violent, and at one point he traveled to France. Jack the Ripper seemed to take a break, but a new crop of killings briefly struck prostitutes in France. Coincidence? Or seriously disturbed artist? I read a book hypothesizing that Jack the Ripper was a doctor's wife. She couldn't have babies, so she attacked the reproductive organs of the victims. Also explains why there was a button from a women's shoe found near the victim. It made a lot of sense to me. She wasn't investigated as they didn't believe women could be serial killers. I'm on my phone, so I can't source it, but I have Google. Story 20, UFO incidents, like the ones in PA or Roswell, secret military aircraft, normally. I live near Wright-Patterson. They fly tons of stuff all the time, so still pretty cool. Also, if you want more info to prove this, the post-World War II years were testing German designs. 50s was wacky Cold War stuff. 60s was pure badassery. 70s was stealth. 80s was the B-2. And the 90 to 2020s will be a mystery for a while. Story 21. One common science myth is that when working out how bees manage to fly, the math comes out saying that they shouldn't be able to. That is, the flight of a bumblebee is mathematically impossible. IARC, the dude who worked that out, was drunk at the time and corrected his mistake a year later. Of course, it makes mathematical sense that bees can fly. Still, people want to cling to that one mistake, I guess because they think it's more interesting than the truth. Story 22. Evolution. Human beings and orangutans descend from a common ancestor. In fact, everything alive descends from a common ancestor. And we know this is fact from research and discoveries in the field of genetics. What we see under the microscope makes the idea as real as anything can be, and we have all the evidence we need to prove it. Many people are not aware of how solid the evidence is, instead clinging to weird, disturbing fairy tale-esque myths about how we got here. All humans descend from African apes. It's a fact, and there's nothing wrong with it. Story 23. Not sure if many people know this one. Right now, 1 in every 1,000 people are born without wisdom teeth. Science believes this is another step in the evolution of humans. Back in cavemen times, they had bigger, longer jaws. So more teeth were necessary, but as we've evolved, our jaws have become smaller and less square-shaped. That's why people have to have them removed. We don't need them anymore. I thought it was really cool when I found out I didn't have any. Story 24. Not quite a mystery, but a misconception. Schrodinger's cat. For those unfamiliar, the basic rundown is that a cat is in an opaque, soundproof box with a 50/50th chance of being alive or dead. If you open the box, the cat dies. However, as long as the box is unopened, the cat is assumed to be both alive and dead, since it's unobserved. A lot of people assume this to be a metaphor of uncertainty and the observer effect in quantum mechanics. Those people obviously don't understand enough about the subject to be speaking on it. Schrodinger's cat was actually meant to be a metaphor for how desperately inadequate relativity was. for explaining quantum-level phenomenon. Wasn't it actually an attempt by Schrodinger to show the absurdity of quantum mechanics? Which is kind of what you said, just the other way around. Story 25, The Mystery of Oak Island and the Money Pit, is not a mystery. It's a common sinkhole. Stuff naturally washes into it, building up debris. Every few centuries or so, a major storm hits and knocks over most of the oak trees. The trees fall in the direction of the wind, so they are all lined up. Floodwaters move trees along, branches and roots get knocked off, and they eventually fall into the sinkhole all lined up. There are no flood booby traps. The hole is next to the ocean. That is just regular, boring old seepage. I drink your milkshake. The logistics of setting something like that up for the sake of burying any sort of treasure are just insane. It would be such a massive undertaking that everyone in the nearby area would know you are burying something. While on the subject, there has never been a confirmed case of lost buried treasure with a treasure map. The concept of a treasure map was not particularly a thing until Treasure Island was published. Most of the hints, like the sign saying 40 feet deeper or whatever it was, tended to show up right at about the time some treasure hunter was about to lose their funding. There's no reason to leave hints if you are burying something that deep anyway. Either you don't want anyone to ever reach it, in which case you don't leave any hints, or you do want someone to reach it, in which case you don't bury it so impossibly deep. The production team for the show on the History Channel must be aware of this knowledge, but they choose not to present it so they can hook viewers. The people who are genuinely interested in it enough to invest in exploring it are always laymen who don't know much about mining technology or geology. Story 26, Bermuda Triangle. The amount of ships and planes that go missing there is about the same as everywhere else. They've also proven that ships have a tendency to sink around the triangle because of the release of masses of methane gas under the surface. This creates thousands of bubbles, which lower the density of the water. Any ship unfortunate enough to be above one of these releases will simply sink. Story 27, Sailing Stones. This was actually very recently solved. Based on a study released in August 2014, news articles reported the mystery solved when researchers observed rock movements using GPS and time-lapse photography. They witnessed and documented a rock movement on December 20th, 2013 that involved more than 60 rocks, with some rocks moving up to 224 meters between December 2013 and January 2014 in multiple movie events. This study contradicted earlier hypotheses of winds or thick ice floating rocks off the surface. Instead, rocks move when large ice sheets just a few millimeters thick start to melt during periods of light wind. These thin floating ice panels push rocks up to 5 meters per minute,